welcome everybody to this session on safeguarding. With me, I'm Sharon Finney, and I am a recently retired multi-agency trainer. I've worked in a local authority for a very long time, and I've been asked by Sarah Lee to do this training for you this morning. We've got Helen Reid and we've got Julie Singleton here with us as well, and Julie's monitoring the chat box as we go along. I'm not going to be seeing the chat box because I'd rather concentrate on the presentation, but I think you can see me. I think my camera's going to remain on throughout, and obviously, as Helen's just reminded us, it is being recorded. I'm not here, sat in front of you as an expert. I'm definitely not an expert, but through my work that I've done for nearly 30 years within a local authority, I have come into contact with a lot of children and families. My work has been particularly around education safeguarding. I've not done an awful lot of work with adults, although we have done training together in adult services. And I have, taken part in many a case conference. I've made referrals. I've given advice and guidance to head teachers and safeguarding leads for many years in our area. So hopefully you'll find this interesting this morning. I'm going to just move us on. So this is the aims and objectives of today. I'm really sorry for you because you're going to be listening to me talking at you now for the next 90 minutes. We're due to finish at 12:30. So I'm, we're not sat in a room together where we can kind of be interactive. It is very much about me talking to you, which is why I'm going to allow that pause. As you can see, I've got my Madonna headset on, just in case I have my own dog barking or the window cleaner comes or something. So hopefully you can hear me okay. And the idea of these workshops is just about understanding your role in terms of safeguarding children and vulnerable adults. It's just something for parent carer forums. By the end of this workshop, you are definitely not going to be an expert. I'm not an expert. None of us are experts. It's just about giving you that extra little bit of knowledge and understanding around safeguarding. We used to refer to it as child protection, didn't we, years ago? We now call it safeguarding. It's that all-encompassing little safe, as I always imagine it, as a safeguarding umbrella. So hopefully, as we go through this, and we're going to start with looking at children's safeguarding first, looking at the different categories of abuse. I'm going to give you some possible indicators, but I'll explain that as we get to it in the session. What's most important, I think, is knowing who to contact if you are concerned about a child or an adult. It's really important that we pass that information on when we have a worry. And then also the last session is looking a little bit more about your own parent carer forums, how to run it, how to, just make sure that you've got clear safeguarding policies and procedures in place. So we'll come to all those as we go along. So what I just need to stress, first of all, is that, I'm just going to go back one. I'm just going to remind you that some of you may have done this training before. Some of you may be new to safeguarding. Just kind of a little bit of a caution is that we're going to be talking about some sensitive issues this morning. Some people might find some of the issues upsetting. You might not like what you're hearing. It might be something that's personal to you. You may have experienced. There may be people sat here who might have experienced some of the stuff that we're going to be talking about this morning. If you need to take a minute and take a little bit of a time out, then that's absolutely fine. It's being recorded. If it's too much, now don't all leave at once. But if it's too much, wait, go through it again when you're ready to look at it. I'm not going to be having a break. We're only here for 90 minutes. So if at any point during this workshop you do need to just pop to the bathroom, or you want to go and make yourself a drink, then please do. You don't need to log out, log back in again. Okay. And I'm going to be giving you lots of links for you to look at some of the other issues that we haven't got time to do this morning. So first and foremost, in terms of safeguarding children, everybody who comes into contact with children and families in your everyday work, including people like some of you here who don't have a specific role in relation to child protection, we all have that duty to safeguard and promote the welfare of children. So it's about being familiar with your procedures. It's no good having fantastic policies and procedures that are just on a shelf. It's about using them, and it's about people knowing about them. And I'll stress that again when we come to that section later on this morning. So, you know, not everybody is going to be somebody who's going to have that direct work, but it is about making sure that we know what to do. And that includes us as members of the public as well. If we look at what we call serious case reviews, and I think you'll all be familiar with serious case reviews, that's usually where there's been a death of a child or a serious incident, or a child's come to serious harm, and you read about them, and we look at where all different agencies have worked together and where things have gone wrong. It stresses the importance, every serious case review stresses the importance of everybody doing their bit. Okay. So what do we mean when we talk about safeguarding? So in the Children Act 2004, safeguarding, as it says there, is about protecting children from maltreatment. It's about preventing the impairment of their health and development. It's ensuring that children grow up with safe and effective care, and we're working in a way that's going to give them the best possible life chances, and this transition into adulthood, a smooth transition. And we know that that's not always the case. Child protection is the little bit of that deals specifically with those children who are at risk of what we call significant harm. They may be at risk of significant harm now, or it might be that they are likely to be at risk of significant harm. And it could be due to neglect or the other forms of abuse. And that's what we're going to look at in this first section. And just to remind everybody, a child is anyone below the age of 18 years. Now, I do know that in, when we're looking at children with SEND, then we're very often going beyond 18. But once you get over 18, you're very often looking at adult services, adult safeguarding. So we're looking first of all up to 18. And that sometimes complicates issues because, I've worked with families where we've worked with teenagers, and sometimes it can be really difficult for other people to understand what we're concerned about, because people might say, oh, well, they're 17, they're a young adult now, they can make their own decisions. But actually, under child protection, they are still classed as a child. And if you think about that as well, that does include our young people, when they leave school at 16 and they go on to college, or they go into apprenticeships and things like that. They might go into the armed forces. They might be in care. They might be in a young offenders institution. It still covers all those children. Okay. Now, alongside safeguarding, there's been a big emphasis in recent years on early help. And I'm going to be referring, as we go through this section, to a document called Working Together to Safeguard Children. That's a government document, and it's a guide to how we work together, the clues in the title. And there's been in the last version in 2018, very much concentrating on early help. So, it's about it's about getting in early and, noticing things that might just, something that might be worrying us, that we think, actually, this family might need some help. This young person might need some early intervention. So what you'll find is across all local authorities across the country, you will have got early help teams based in a locality near you. Okay. Somebody's got the microphone on, I think. So some examples of early, and this is not a tick box thing, it's a massive long, examples in working together. But it might be that it is a young person who's a young carer, for example. So it might be that we find out that a young person is having to help to look after a parent, a grandparent in the home. They might be missing school because they've got to provide care. Before they go to school in the morning, they might have to help their mum or dad to get dressed. They might have to attend appointments with them. They might, so you'll very often find, again, across the country, that Barnardo's operate fantastic young carer schemes that offer that support to those families. If you have a child who's disabled or got specific additional needs, getting in there early, you'll all be very familiar with those plans. It might be that we've got a young person who's starting to get involved in criminal activity, maybe antisocial behaviour, going missing. It might be that there are some indicators that a child is living in a home, perhaps where there's some domestic abuse issues. Or we're just spotting those early signs of potentially of abuse and neglect. So getting in there early rather than when it's too late, when we're at crisis point. So when we talk about abuse, what do we mean? And again, this is from that document that I mentioned to you, Working Together. You can look at this document. It's available as an online version. So if there are other things that you wanted to look at, then please have a look at it. It's dead easy to get to it. And I think I've put a link to it at the end for you, actually, for working. Yes, I have. I've put a link to it. So this is the kind of what we call the official definition of abuse. So it's a form of maltreatment of a child. So somebody might abuse or neglect a child by deliberately inflicting harm, or they're failing to act. So, one or another. Children can be abused in a family, in an institution, or a community setting, by those known to them. It's very rarely is it by somebody else. Although we have to acknowledge that does happen. So, for example, via the internet or as somebody who's not known to the family. And it might be that they're abused by an adult or adults, or it could be another child or other children. Now, in this session this morning, we haven't got time really to go through some of the issues raised in serious case reviews. So I mentioned a few minutes ago, a serious case review is where we've perhaps had the death of a child, or we've had serious incidents involving a child or young person, and it's about looking at where things have gone wrong more often than not, unfortunately. And serious case reviews highlight that the majority of harm is done within the family. So if you look at some particular high profile cases that you'll have come across over the years, so Victoria Climbié, Daniel Pelker, Peter Connolly, Baby P, you'll be familiar with these names, all members of the family in one way or another. So, Victoria Climbié, a great aunt who was looking after her. Daniel Pelker, his mum and her partner. Baby P, mum, brother. And we've had the more recent cases as well, which you may have been following in the press or on the television. Arthur Lavinia Hughes and the beautiful Star Hobson. Have a look, they are upsetting to read those cases. And I know over the years, as I've done training, people go, oh no, I don't want to watch, I don't want to listen to it. And it is really difficult. We appreciate that. But, if you look at Star Hobson, a very recent case in Bradford, members of the family tried to do something about it. So, and it was mum and her partner that was doing the abuse. So, but it does happen sometimes that it is a stranger or somebody not known to the family. And in children's safeguarding, these are the 4 categories of abuse that we look at. So we look at physical, emotional, neglect, and sexual. In my training that I've done over the years with schools, I always tell staff to try and remember it as pens. So I've had people coming up to me in the supermarket and saying, oh, I remember you, pens. So physical, emotional, neglect, and sexual. And again, they're all defined by working together and the Department of Health. So this is physical. And again, it's not an all-encompassing, it's a definition. So we know that there'll be lots of other things that happen to children that will be classed as physical abuse. So in this definition, it's saying it could involve hitting, shaking, throwing, poisoning, burning, drowning, suffocating, you know, all pretty horrific stuff that we don't really want to have to think about, do we? And it can also be caused when a parent or carer fabricates the symptoms of or deliberately induces illness in a child. Some of you will remember that used to be called Munchausen syndrome or Munchausen syndrome by proxy. So just when we'd all got used to saying Munchausen's, it was changed to fabricated. It's actually fabricated, fictitious or induced illness. Okay, so that's physical. Emotional, quite a long and wordy definition when we look at this one. I think the key for me has always been that very top line. Look at the word persistent. Persistent emotional maltreatment of a child. So to cause severe and persistent adverse effects on the child's emotional development. You know, as a parent, you sometimes say things to your children that you perhaps regret instantly. You know, the thing is, it's that persistence. So, you know, making a child feel that they're worthless or unloved, that they're inadequate. It might be that you are preventing your child from participating in normal social interaction. It might be it's overprotection. It might involve seeing or hearing the ill treatment of another. Think about domestic abuse, making children feel frightened or in danger. It could be things like bullying or exploitation or corruption of children. Now, what I just want to stress is emotional abuse stands alone as a category of abuse. However, I think we would all acknowledge emotional runs across all four categories. So if you are being physically abused, sexually abused, neglected, there is going to be that element of emotional abuse that's underpinning everything as well. So I hope that kind of makes sense to you. Neglect. Again, that word's there, isn't it? That word persistent, that persistent failure to meet a child's basic physical and or psychological needs. We've got an example there of pre-birth. So don't forget, we also have to protect unborn babies, unborn children. They have no rights of their own. They can't tell us, can they? So, you know, if we notice that we feel that a child is being neglected in the womb, so for example here, as a result of maternal substance abuse, or it could be lifestyle, you know, when we look at the factors around domestic abuse in a little while, you'll see that, you know, very often domestic abuse starts in pregnancy. Think about that baby, that unborn baby. How are we going to protect them? Once the child is born, neglect might involve a parent or carer failing to kind of do the obvious. You know, as parents, you know that you're going to have to provide food, clothing, shelter, supervision. And this is about where we're not doing it, you know, we're not doing that. We're not protecting, we're not providing food. And it talks there about adequate food. So we're not saying you've all got to buy all your food from Waitrose. That's, you know, that's not what this is about. It's about adequate food, clothing and shelter. A child needs to have somewhere to sleep. They need to feel safe. They need to feel protected. In terms of supervision, you know, sometimes when we looked at some of the serious case reviews, ones that we've had in our local area that I've worked on, there has been issues around inadequate caregivers, unsuitable people looking after children, and then things have happened. You know, not ensuring your child gets medical care or treatment. And maybe also there's a very strong link between neglect and emotional abuse. So, you know, being unresponsive to a child's emotional needs as well, maybe shutting down to that. So moving on to sexual. Now with sexual abuse, this talks about, again, these are all official definitions, they're not my definitions. Remember, these are official definitions. You know, it's thinking about the forcing or enticing children or young person to take part in sexual activities. It may not necessarily involve a high level of violence, but it might mean that this child actually doesn't realize that this thing that happens to them is sexual abuse. And the people who do it are very good at it. So you will have probably heard about the term grooming. So, you know, children will be groomed, children may be selected. You know, if it's not within the family, you know, it might be within a family, sorry, it might be that there's only one child within a family that's sexually abused, but it could be it's all the children. It could be a physical activity. So for example, things like rape, or it could be what we call non-penetrative acts. So other indecent acts against or with children. It could be that someone is encouraging a child to look at sexual images, watching sexual activities, being inappropriate. And as I've just mentioned, that grooming. So kind of that process of preparing a child for abuse. And I think we just need to get away from thinking that sexual abuse is always perpetrated by adult males. And we know that that's not true. Women can also commit those acts, as can children. So far this morning, we've been, you know, we're looking at some pretty nasty stuff, aren't we? And I think it's important to read through those again. So have another look at those when you've got the chance, and you sort of get familiar with it. If we were doing this in a room together, we'd now take some time to sort of do a bit of a group discussion and think about signs and indicators. I'm actually going to give you some signs and indicators, but I must stress, and you know, you'll look at this yourself when you've got a bit more time. This is not a tick box exercise. So, you know, looking at, for example, on the column that says neglect, you know, poor growth, that might be for something else as well. Dressed inappropriately for the weather. If that's something that's happening persistently, then that might cause a concern. But I think we're all familiar with a child that don't want to put the coat on or wants to go to school in their Snow White outfit. We know that, and that's life, you know, as parenting, that's life sometimes. These are just things that people might pick up. And actually, this is something that I used to use in schools, actually. Sort of, you know, thinking about people who with a lot of children and maybe starting to notice some things that are coming through. So don't look at that and think, oh, that sounds like us. Please don't do that. In terms of emotional, you know, some of the things on there, you might notice a child who is being constantly shouted at, threatened, you know, a parent that's regularly humiliating a child, and that will concern you. It might be that that parent's really struggling to cope. So this is, you know, it's when we see an indicator, it doesn't always mean that a social worker's come along and going to whisk that child away. This is about getting the right support for families. In terms of physical, there will be some cases where you will notice maybe bruising on a child in an area perhaps that you wouldn't expect to see bruising. You know, it might be that you can see an implement. It might be that a child seems to be frightened of a parent or maybe flinching. You know, it's really important, and we're going to come to this later, about making sure that you pass those concerns on. In terms of physical injuries, if a child is taken to, say, for example, accident and emergency, what they will look at there with children with injuries is, does the explanation fit the injury? Is the injury consistent with what parent carers say? And I'm guessing that a lot of you here will have had the absolute pleasure of having to take a child to A&E. It's a nightmare. You might be sat there for 8 hours. You're worried, you're stressed. And then they start to ask you these questions. They have to ask the questions. You know, they might have a body map that they're looking at and marking it down. They need to find out if a child's got an injury, how that injury occurred. If the child is able to, they will ask the child as well. Obviously, they can't always ask the child, and they will also ask parent that's brought them as well about the injury. And in terms of sexual, what I just need to stress is that for sexual abuse, there may be no indicators whatsoever. Think about the secrecy that surrounds sexual abuse. You know, and very often children are told to keep quiet and not to tell anybody by the abuser. However, we may have some physical indicators that's telling us that there's something wrong somewhere. So, you know, as I've just said, don't take those as a definite tick, tick, tick. Oh yeah, we've ticked 6 things on emotional. That means we've got emotional abuse. They're just indicators that could potentially indicate harm. You know, there might be a simple explanation for something. Additional indicators for children with special educational needs and disabilities. You know, it's just about thinking of the additional needs that a child might have. Some children may be particularly vulnerable because they can't speak out, they can't tell anybody, they might not understand. They may always need intimate care, and that might go right through into adulthood. You know, and depending on adults for care, and if those adults aren't caring for them in the right way, then, you know, issues may occur. I've taken that slide, that information from the NSPCC, and they have an absolutely brilliant section all around special educational needs and disabilities on their NSPCC learning site. So, you know, if you can follow that link, please have a look at that. And what I want to mention to you as well is something that we call, is quite new. The term is quite new to a lot of people, but it's, you know, it's been around a while actually, but we talk about now contextual safeguarding. So earlier I said to you, didn't I, when we talked about the definition of abuse, that more often than not, abuse happens within a family. Contextual safeguarding is actually looking at the wide range of risks that could potentially cause harm to a child outside of the family. And again, it's not an exhaustive list, but it can include peer-on-peer abuse. So, you know, child-on-child abuse, relationship abuse. So we know that nationally, abuse within teenage relationships has increased over the years. You've probably all heard about criminal exploitation, what we refer to as county lines, the kind of the drug running. So when you hear people talking about county lines, it's kind of an American term. If you remember watching old American movies where they can't step over the county line. County lines very often is about young people, particularly young men, young teenagers, but it can happen to girls as well, who are groomed, and they're groomed in this case to predominantly move drugs about the country. So it might be that they are moving drugs from a town to maybe a small seaside place. So you might have got young people, you know, who live in Sheffield, going to places like Scarborough, Whitby, doing drug running. You know, children from Manchester have been found in Birmingham. Children from Birmingham have been found in Cornwall, across the country. So moving predominantly drugs about. So in that criminal, all that criminal activity. So we kind of, in the area where I live and worked, we talked about child criminal exploitation, and within that we also included sexual exploitation as well. You know, some young people will be exposed to online abuse. Young people spend hours and hours and hours, don't they, online. And it's a fantastic thing, but it can also bring those dangers as well, you know. And as a parent, we worry about what they're looking at and, you know, what they're being exposed to online. And of course, young people are nearly always a step in front of us, aren't they? So they know what to do. They know what to look for, and we don't always know what to look for. Going missing, gang activity, being radicalized. So, you know, maybe being at risk of terrorist activity, maybe extreme far right. Again, we talk very much about grooming. The risks in public spaces, you know, you want your children to be able to do stuff, but you're still worried about, you know, what might happen when they're out there. And what we refer to as trafficking and modern slavery, and that can happen to children and adults, so being moved around for various different means. In terms of sexual exploitation, you know, young people being trafficked from house to house, street to street, town to town. So again, I've given you another good link there, all about contextual safeguarding. So if you're interested in that, you want to have a little bit more look at that, then please follow that link. I've just mentioned online abuse, and again, I've given you a good link there. CEOP, which is Child Exploitation and Online Protection. It's a police site. It's absolutely fantastic. There's loads of information on there that you can get as a parent, for children and young people, you know, for your forum. You can have a look at some of there. There's activities, there's posters, there's information, online training that would help you to understand how easy it is for young people to be abused online. So that can be while they're playing a game. So for example, Call of Duty is a popular one that a lot of young people play, and some adults, you know, and you can play people from all across the world. We just don't know who those people are. TikTok used to be on the list of dodgy sites when I were working. Now people use TikTok for everything, but just be thinking about perhaps the settings that you've got on for something like TikTok. You can have public and you can have private. So public means that anybody can see you. Private means you're restricting it maybe to your friends. But you know, online bullying, cyberbullying, it's an increasingly common form of bullying, and it can be very, very upsetting. And again, people will do this grooming online. You don't even have to be in the same room, and it's really easy to hide your identity, and it's really easy to pretend to be a child. You know, some of the things that, if you look at CEOP, that can help you, they've got some excellent little videos that you could watch with your child or your young person, that gives you some ideas about how to protect them, from as simple as what's in the background, what they're wearing. So if they're online and everybody can see them and they've got their school jumper on and it's got their logo, then somebody could zoom in on that logo and you know, start talking about that school. It starts to open up a conversation about where they live. You know, it's so easy for somebody to do that. So please, and you will notice that the CEOP button is the red button that you can press on things like Facebook if you want to report abuse. Okay, so before we move on to adults, is there anything, Julie, that anybody's, I saw somebody had put the hand up earlier.
Right, so the things I've been picking up from the chat are people wanting data on family abuse and male versus female family abuse, and Catherine and Sarah Lee have both given some links to that, to the NMPCA.
Good, thank you.
The National Data, National Office for Statistics. And people are talking about it's quite controversial, fictitious illness, because a lot of families with SEND are experiencing that sometimes, you know, often incorrectly, because there's not been an understanding of their children's needs.
Absolutely, I get that.
And somebody also said that children who commit abuse may be being abused themselves. It could be an indication themselves. somebody had said it can be a relationship between boyfriend and girlfriend.
Yes, definitely.
Somebody else has mentioned about Munchausen's by internet, which touches on your last slide, I think.
Yeah.
And people were asking about when they could get, getting the slides, and I've explained on the chat that they'll come in short, they'll be available along with the recording.
Yeah.
Sarah, was there anything else that I didn't pick up on that you noticed, Sarah Lee?
Yes, I've got a question in about how to differentiate between what is part of a child's special educational needs and disabilities and what is an indicator of abuse. The person says, we relate to our members as peers who get it. How can we maintain that role and report some of these indicators of abuse? For example, I know many parents who report their children cannot wear weather appropriate clothing, tolerate personal care tasks, have restricted diets because of sensory issues. How do we know when we should report? Or whether we'll be making things worse for the child?
And I get that. I absolutely understand that, because we know that. I think for me, it's the if it's something that's really worrying you, sometimes I know people don't want to make it worse, but sometimes just about having that conversation with your own safeguarding person and just running through it. And, and sometimes having a conversation with a parent saying that we've noticed this. But I do appreciate that there are people here who will today be thinking, well, my child has real difficulties doing that and somebody might be reporting me. I think if you think about the key words about persistence, and if you've got that, if the child seems to be being neglected, then you're going to have a conversation with somebody, but it doesn't always mean that you're going to be reporting something. Does that kind of make that clear?
I think the other thing I would say is that we all have a duty to report concerns. So if it's a concern, I think you're right, talking it through is the best approach.
Don't keep it. I'm going to talk about that when we do about reporting, not keeping it to yourself and actually having a conversation and saying, this is worrying me. And very often with some children, there's a plan in place and we know about their little things that they do. We know that they don't want to wear a coat. My friend's little boy hated wearing any clothes, to be honest. And, people knew about that and knew how to manage that. I guess sometimes it's if it's something new that you notice that you're worried about, something that you've not noticed before. What I would always say is that the child is always in the center of everything. So it's always about the child. Don't forget the needs of the child in all this. What impact is it having on the child by all these things happening? The child always comes first, really. So, if you're really worried, then you're worried. You might not know what you're worried about, but you just need to have that conversation. Anything else?
Yes, I've got another one, Sharon. Somebody has said that dyspraxia is a condition that lands children in hospital often.
Yes.
Hospital staff aren't always really helpful.
No.
If the children is non-verbal, it's worse. Social services and all as well.
And I think we just have to acknowledge that sometimes that happens and it can be really upsetting and, distressing for families who know that a child is going to have injuries, bruises. And I guess they're doing their job in that they're looking at that. And it is really difficult if a child can't tell you. It's the same with babies. If a baby can't tell you, same as some other children. So the hospital are kind of just doing their job, really, however distressing that is. I'm not saying that lightly. I understand that. Anything else? Any more?
No, there is somebody's just mentioned about parents don't mind issues being raised, but sometimes if parents asking for help, it's turned down.
Yes.
Or parents concerned are often ignored or sometimes ignored.
Yeah. But I think by having a conversation, you may be able to help that parent get some support. You know, it's really difficult when you're on your own trying to get support, isn't it? But maybe by talking to somebody else, then it opens up those channels maybe, and it's another voice maybe to support an application, for example, for early help.
Somebody else has mentioned safeguarding in relation to domestic abuse.
I'm going to look at domestic abuse in a minute.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Lovely. Thank you.
Thank you. So we're going to move on now to talking about adults, starting off with what is a vulnerable adult. Again, these are kind of taken from official information. A vulnerable adult is someone who has needs for care and support. They may be experiencing or at risk of abuse or neglect, and they might be unable to protect themselves. So it's sometimes referred to as an adult at risk of harm. And there's a little quote there that I've picked up actually from our local authority, our local adult safeguarding board. And I really like that. Abuse is not normal and it's never okay. Being abused means a person is being deliberately hurt by someone else. So it can be from something that's seemingly a trivial act of not treating someone with dignity and respect to extreme punishment, cruelty or torture. And in the abuse of adults, as we've just gone through with children, there's only 4 categories of abuse that we look at with children, although we do look at some other areas as well in terms of children's safeguarding, the same as adults, things like female genital mutilation, forced marriage, domestic abuse. We look at those as well, but in terms of the official categories, there's just 4 for children. Adults have got 10. So these are the different categories that adult safeguarding would consider. So financial and material abuse, modern slavery, sexual abuse, organisational abuse, physical, not providing care and support, psychological, self-neglect, discriminatory abuse and domestic abuse. So we are going to look at just a little bit of possible signs and indicators again. And again, you know, I'm not an expert. These are just potential signs that we all may pick up on with an adult, you know. So if we think about those indicators about the financial stuff, so this might be an adult who is not having enough money, food or clothing, because it might be that somebody's taking that money off them or misusing their benefit. It could be that we're seeing signs of malnutrition. Maybe they're not looking after themselves very well. Maybe they've got things like bed sores, not having the medication that they should be having. Maybe medication is being taken by somebody else. They're getting it, but they're not giving it to that person. They may be using it. I mentioned earlier about the county lines, about the young people involved in criminal activity. What you may hear about as well in terms of that, and it links in with adults, so I'm not going off at a tangent, is something called cuckooing. And cuckooing is about taking over somebody's house or property. So we sometimes have these gang leaders who will take over a vulnerable person's house or flat. They might befriend them, and we've had a case locally a couple of years ago where a couple befriended a vulnerable man, a man in his 50s, and they said that they'd help to care for him, they'd do his jobs for him, they'd go and collect his prescriptions, and they took over his property entirely, and they were running drugs from there. And this man then became so vulnerable when he tried to get help that they assaulted him, they beat him up, and eventually he did get some support, and that went through to court. But so you might hear that term cuckooing, so taking over somebody, so somebody who's quite vulnerable. It might be the living conditions that they're in. It might be that somebody's refusing support, and you know, we can understand sometimes why people do refuse support, but if you feel that it's really detrimental to their health and well-being, it might be that you need to offer to maybe get them to understand why they need support. You know, showing signs of anxiety, emotional harm. A lot of us can suffer from anxiety. I understand that. But it might be that you're seeing it because it's of a particular person that's maybe causing that distress. It could be it's an organisation. So it could be, you know, within maybe, for example, a care home, where you feel that there is a lack of staffing, a lack of effective management. And I think we all understand at the moment that a lot of settings are struggling with having staff who are fit and well enough to be able to be at work because of all the COVID restrictions. That's been an issue, hasn't it, recently? It might be somebody who's been discriminated against, you know, for the race, for the sex, for the gender, the religion. And in terms of the sexual stuff, it could be that they are being forced to take part in sexual acts without their consent. They might be being trafficked or sexually exploited or criminally exploited, as I've just been mentioning. And it could also be things like modern slavery, being forced into labour, servitude. We could be looking at issues of forced marriage, being locked up. And again, we've just had a case recently of somebody who's had their son locked up in an attic. Absolutely barbaric. You know, depriving somebody of their money, their personal belongings. You know, that, you know, so again, this is not a tick box thing. It might just be some things that we might notice. It's just to give you an idea. In an ideal world, we'd have had a nice long conversation about that and we'd have come up with some of those signs and indicators ourselves. So moving on, disability, hate incidents can happen as well, can't they? So someone, you know, is being violent or hostile towards you because you're disabled, then that might be classed as a hate incident. It can happen anywhere. It might be that you know the person that's done this to you, but sometimes it can be done by a stranger. It might be something that happens on the bus, in the street, in a shop. You can sometimes be a victim of a disability hate incident if someone believes that you're disabled, even though you're not. And it might be about by association. So for example, and some of you may have experienced this, if someone targets you because you have a disabled child. Now, I've just given you a link there to Citizens Advice, but, you know, I found that was a really useful link to look at. But of course, you can go directly to the police. And if you look at most police forces will have a disability and hate crime officer that you could speak to, but please don't hesitate to report it. I want to just remind you about Fiona Pilkington and her daughter Francesca. You might be familiar with this case, some of you, because we've done training before. Fiona killed herself, unfortunately, and her daughter after years of torment by local youths to their house. They reported time and time again, well, as you can see there were 33 recorded incidents to the police. And you know, we're not police blaming here, but this lady tried her best to get somebody to listen to her. She was really worried. They were experiencing terrible incidents within the community, really targeted. They felt, you know, they felt isolated. They felt that nobody wanted to help them. Nobody was listening, and she took the worst way out, really. And I think she sat in the car with her daughter, and I think she set fire to themselves, which is, you know, a really drastic thing to do. And that resulted in what we call a serious case review. And the findings were that, you know, they were dealt with, the incidents weren't linked So they weren't all put together. They were sort of dealt with in isolation, and there was no structure. So, you know, you would hope that somebody would pick up that why is this lady coming and saying these things? Are we following that up properly? So it's an interesting but very sad case if you wanted to have a look at that, Fiona Pilkington. So please, you know, if it is something that's happening to you or somebody that you know, then please get them to report it, seek further advice. And there are other websites out there. If you just Googled hate crime or disability crime, hate incident. I said we'd mention domestic abuse, and this is the Home Office definition. And it's talking about any incident or patterns of incidents of controlling, coercive or threatening behaviour, violence or abuse between those aged 16 or over who've been intimate partners or family members, regardless of gender or sexuality. Now, in a previous Home Office definition, it talked about 18 or over. That age has been lowered. So, you know, and we're not just talking about this as being your husband, your wife. It could be a family member, so it could be a son or a daughter that's doing that. It doesn't matter what gender or sexuality they are, you know, victims or abusers. It can encompass, but not limited to, things like psychological, physical, sexual, financial, emotional abuse. It's just worth reminding us that, again, in more recent years, they've added on the controlling and coercive behaviour. So controlling behaviour, you know, making them maybe be dependent on them, isolating them, so kind of removing them from their friends and their family, not letting them go anywhere, regulating their everyday behaviour, following them. You know, stalking and harassment is a big part of domestic abuse as well. Coercive behaviour are those acts, you know, threats, humiliation, assaults, you know, that a perpetrator can use to harm or frighten their victim. So just flicking back again. So just, you know, just to remind you that it's 16 or over. So we do have adolescent to parent abuse. And, you know, we have abuse within families. We have domestic abuse, you know, and people who've been married, you know, 50 and 60 odd years, and it's still happening. And people are frightened to say anything. They may be so frightened of that perpetrator, you know, that they're just not going to ask for help. There may be some signs and indicators, but again, I'm going to, you know, get you to have a look at where to get help. So it could be the physical indicators, sexual, financial. So please have a look at that. Link into those, the government website. There is a few statistics here. I can't carry statistics in my head. I'm not that clever. But there's just some statistics that you might be interested in. So, for example, one incident is reported to the police every minute across the country. It talks particularly on this slide about women, but we have to acknowledge that men can also be victims as well. 750,000 children witness domestic abuse each year. And when we look at child protection cases nationally, we know that around about 60% of those cases will also involve domestic abuse. That's the case for us in our local authority, nearest to me. There are some linked issues with domestic abuse, of course. So things like forced marriage, which is different to arranged marriage. So, you know, there may be some people here today who have had a very successful arranged marriage. A forced marriage, very briefly, is, you know, where one or both parties do not agree. Honour-based violence, It might be that there is some perceived element of maybe somebody bringing shame upon their family. I'm stressing perceived because it might not be. An interesting case to have a look at if you wanted to, and you can find the documentary on YouTube, is Banaz Mahmood, and this featured on Crime Watch as well. And Banaz, A Love Story, is on YouTube, and it talks about a young woman who was murdered by members of her own family for allegedly bringing dishonor to the family. But again, have a look at that link. Female genital mutilation, you know, there is absolutely no need for a girl or woman to have FGM, as we refer to it, performed on them. It's like female circumcision. It can happen at any age. It can happen just after birth. It could happen, you know, at 16, 17. It can happen at any age to a woman. It brings with it horrific complications. It's lifelong, really, and it's illegal. So it's against the law to perform female genital mutilation in this country, or remove a child out of the country to have it done and brought back. The most common age for FGM to occur is around about between 5 and 8 years old. But as I've said, it can happen at any age. But please, you know, if you're not familiar with female genital mutilation, you may not want to look at that, but it's there for you if you want to know a little bit more. And I kept mentioning modern slavery throughout this morning. Please have a look at that link there to the Metropolitan Police. They've got good information on there. But in terms of modern slavery, we could be looking at domestic servitude. We could be looking at people being maybe brought into our country to work in like the sex industry. It might be that children are used as, you know, pickpockets, criminal activities. So modern slavery is a massive issue in this country. And before we move on to the last few bits on the returns of reporting, just thinking about the impact of domestic abuse on children. So when we talk about worries, you know, it might be that a child's telling you something about what's happening in their house, so you can't see any signs of neglect or anything, you know, but this might be what's happening to a child at home. So I just wanted to remind everybody. Okay. And again, another link there for you. I'm going to do this section and then I'll see if there's any other questions on that bit before we do the bit about policies and procedures. So I just want us to think about how we respond. So, you know, it might be that it's something that you've seen. So in terms of everything that we've looked at so far this morning, from children's safeguarding through adult, through domestic abuse, it could be that it's something that you've seen, it's something that you've heard. It might be that somebody's told you something that worries you. Sometimes people come to us because we know that we have contact with families, that we're in an organisation. You know, I've had people come in and tell me things because they know I used to work for the council and all sorts of different reasons. Sometimes you don't know what you're worried about. You know that you're worried, but you don't know what it is. Sometimes a child or a person, an adult, will just come straight out with it and tell you something because they feel that they can trust you. You can't force a child or somebody to tell you something. They will choose you, and you need to know what to do if they do. So don't ever ignore or dismiss anything that you've been told or what you've seen. You need to seek advice. I call it a designated safeguarding lead. In your own forums, you might call it a named person. It might be your safeguarding person. Whatever you call that person, you need to speak to them. You know, don't keep it to yourself. I've put you some do's and don'ts here. I've had these for years and years. They might look really out of date, but I just think you can't go wrong, really. So, you know, if somebody does tell you something, it's a child or it's an adult, it's really important, if you can, to listen and try and remain calm. You know, don't look shocked. If you go, oh my God, that is absolutely terrible, that's going to kind of put that person maybe off. They might start to think about not upsetting you. It's really important that we reassure without saying things that we shouldn't. So reassure, I'm here to listen, you know, I'm taking what you say seriously. I understand how difficult this is. Some children may not even realize that they're actually telling you something. You probably know yourselves, children, out of the mouth of babes, you know, children reveal your deepest secrets when you least want them to, don't they? If you can record something, I don't mean record as in pressing the record button on your phone. I want you to make sure that you record everything, but I would suggest that you do it as soon as you can afterwards, not while somebody's talking to you, because that again can be really off-putting if you pick your pen up and start writing it down. And I know that can be quite difficult to remember, but try and remember what kind of words they use, particularly if it's a child. And sometimes a child might use words that you're not comfortable with. So if it's something about sexual, you might not necessarily use those words yourself, but that's really important. If they say something like that, they think, oh, okay, I'm going to remember that that's how they phrased it. Remember to record date and time that something happened, where you were, and remember to report it to DSL is designated safeguarding lead. You know, remember to report it, or not say report it, have that discussion. In terms of don'ts, try not, as I've just said, try not to look shocked or upset. And then that can be really difficult when we're hearing something or we've seen something. Don't decide that you're going to investigate it or challenge the alleged perpetrator. That's not your role to do that. Don't start speculating or making assumptions. And I would also say keep things confidential. Don't start talking about it to everybody. You know, we don't want everybody getting involved in it. And then people start saying, oh, yeah, well, can you remember that time when they did this? Or, oh, yes, you said that. We don't want to get into that situation. We always remember it's need to know. Try and keep it confidential. But what you can't do is promise not to say anything. So, you know, if a child says, will you keep, or an adult says to you, will you keep it a secret? We can't keep secrets. We have to pass that information on. You know, so don't be making promises that you can't keep. Don't be saying, oh yeah, everything will be fantastic now you've told me that, we'll get it all sorted, because we might not. And never ignore it. Always do something. Okay. So in terms of reporting, you've all got a safeguarding lead that you can speak to in the first instance. I'm guessing that you'd have a deputy as well. I'm not quite sure. I'm new to parent care and forums, so I'm assuming that you'd have a deputy, but I'll be put right in a minute, I think, if not. That named person, they will know who to contact. They will know who to speak to. They may also want to be the people that speak to parents or carers. And we know that having those open conversations with parents can sometimes prevent a referral being made. You know, actually saying to somebody, you know, we've noticed this, we're worried, is there anything we can do to help? But, you know, have that conversation with them. We do try to inform parents as much as possible before a referral is being made to children's social care, but we might not always be able to do so. And it may not be safe to do so. Remember, always think about the safety of the child. In terms of adults, you may be able to have a better conversation with an adult about what you're going to do and where you're going to go than you can perhaps with a child. You know, if you can be open and honest as much as you can, then please do that with an adult. But again, seek advice from your designated safeguarding person. Don't keep it to yourself. And if needs be, and you can't get hold of anybody else, the local authority where you live will have a phone line that you can speak to. It's not always, when you pick up that phone, it doesn't mean to say that you are referring something. It could be that you're just asking for some advice. And in some places, you don't even have to say your name. You can just ring up and say, look, I've got a worry. You can speak to the NSPCC if you can't speak to anybody else as well. But if you can, try and speak to your safeguarding lead. And I quite liked this. I've only just found this when I was doing this presentation, 5 statements that help encourage people to speak up. So it's about standing up for people who can't speak up for themselves. You know, it's not about snitching or being a grass. This is about being worried and seeking advice. You know, if we don't do anything at all, that child or person, adult, might be even at more risk. You know, and I know we feel uncomfortable about things like this. You know, I've made many a referral over the years to children's social care, and I know how difficult it is, and I have never taken that lightly. I've always sought advice. I've always talked it through. You know, and your organisation should protect you. And this is what leads us on to the next section, which is all about our policies and procedures. But again, you might want to have a look at that link about how to respond. So Julie, is there anything while we've just done that section? I'm just conscious of the time. You're on mute, Julie.
On instead, sorry about that. Yeah, a few people have mentioned the misuse of sectioning in mental health institutions as like an issue around safeguarding. Some people were talking about domestic violence situations, and I know you covered that, but saying the impact on the child or young person in the domestic violence situation at home can be self-harming or eating disorders.
Yeah.
Somebody was saying, it was actually a question, is that we work with parent carers. How, if we're being raised, issues and concerns have been raised to us, how do we do that? Because we don't want to lose members. How do we deal with that? Because we don't want to lose members.
Well, ultimately, if we're worried about a child, we're worried about a child, whether we lose members or not. The safeguarding has to be your priority, I'm afraid. And I've had schools say this to me over the years. Oh, we don't want to upset parents because we've only just got them on board. If we're that worried, then we're worried.
Sorry, it was my question.
Yeah, hello.
I think I probably didn't put it in clearly.
Okay.
We're not working directly with the children, so it's not like the child has like said their concerns or anything. And if it's like hearsay and we've just had another parent say, oh, we think the child is being abused or something like that, we don't want to go based on hearsay or rumors or anything like that.
No, I get your point.
That's why I was saying, like, if we the parent and we've upset the parent, like for us as a forum, it's really difficult to get members in the first place, and then we don't want to upset. And
I know.
And that was the question, basically.
Yeah, I know what you mean. You don't want people to say, oh, don't go there because they're always reporting you, kind of thing. Yeah. I guess, again, I would suggest that if it comes to you through a different channel, you know, like that, somebody just mentioning to you, then I would still have that conversation with your safeguarding person. Just to have, you know, and I would definitely record it somewhere. I would, you know, make sure you've got a record of that conversation somewhere. Because you never know that something else might crop up.
That's fine.
You know?
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That makes sense. Anything else, Julie, before we move on?
No, just people were mentioning different things, training for safeguarding leads. Somebody has asked, how can you get training for safeguarding leads? And I think most local authorities sometimes provide it for free, don't they?
Yes, they do. Yeah.
So you can get to contact your local council.
Yeah, if you look at your local safeguarding boards or partnerships, they've all changed the names over the last couple of years. But if you look, you'll always find children or adult safeguarding board or partnerships in your area, and there'll always be a link then to training and development or learning. They like to call it learning, and then on there you'll usually find a prospectus, And then you'll see that there's quite a lot. I think a lot of them are still doing things like this online. So you'd be able to link in to that. And it might be something that we could look at ourselves. You know, I'm more than happy to put something on for safeguarding Leeds as well, if we needed to at some point.
Thank you. I've got a question actually.
Yeah.
So some forums may be dealing with parent carers who've got issues, challenges or barriers or difficulties themselves around a range of different issues. And are they also considered vulnerable adults? So for example, if the parent might have mental health issues or a disability themselves or something like that, would they also be called vulnerable adults, or would it depend?
I think it would depend on the situation and the circumstances, to be honest, because you know, there's a lot of people out there, they've got a whole range of different issues, and not everybody would be classed as a vulnerable adult. So I think it's if you can sort of narrow it down really to if you were really concerned about their welfare, really, I would say. That's probably not a very good answer, but I don't know if anybody else wants to come in on that, Sarah or Catherine.
Had to go to another meeting.
She had to go, yeah.
So yeah, just think to kind of like, because I just think that sometimes we might be or forums might be dealing with parents who've got lots of challenges and lots of issues, and so sometimes they may also be in need of support.
They might, and if we can identify it and help them to get support, then that'd be fantastic, wouldn't it? I think somebody just put the hand up.
Okay, can't see that. Where's that gone?
Vicky.
Oh right, Vicky.
Yeah, I'd just like to say something. I think where I find it difficult, I mean, stalking's something that's become bigger, but it's also, I feel like we become, they confide in us much more than anyone else.
Yeah.
And that then makes things quite difficult, because you start things and then they might not tell them quite the same thing, because when they sort of normally talk to you, I could spend 3 hours on a conversation talking about someone's next door neighbour's cat to find out there's domestic violence.
Yeah, I know.
And you know, and it's domestic violence. Sometimes it's not about violence or abuse.
No.
It's the physical, it's the bullying. And this is where when I report it, I just find it difficult, because then I'm like, what part? I mean, I just record it like you say, but it's when they confide so much in you. Sometimes you can't see the wood through the trees, and you think, which one is important? You know, is it the child? Is it the parent?
Yeah.
Because there's so many different ways. It'd be nice if you could have one person.
Yeah.
And have an umbrella. I don't know if that makes any sense.
I know just what you mean. You know what I would look at? I would look at that Refuge website, because on there you've got areas for children and adults. And I think if you have like a little in your forums, if you have places where you know that you can signpost people to, because we can't always solve everybody's problem, can we? You know, and we end up then, don't we? Like you've just said, it's all encompassing and you just don't know what you're doing. So, and I know a lot of voluntary organisations that do some fantastic work with the whole family.
Yeah, I think our problem is I think it's lack of resources, or maybe lack of what's knowing. I mean, it could be out there, but again, it's trying to find it, because there isn't like a page that says,
I know,
you know, abuse or physical, mental. And that's what I find difficult. That I put them through to DSL, but then it's very much, a lot of them will come back and go, well, they didn't really tell me where to go, because they don't fit the criteria or something, if that makes sense.
They don't.
So
I know they don't.
I just wondered if you had any advice. That was all.
Yeah,
sorry to jump in.
No, it's fine. Definitely look at that. Look at Refuge.
Yeah. Okay.
Because it's really good, and see, you know, if you've got numbers that you can give people, because some people don't actually realise that the situation they're in is domestic abuse, do they?
Yeah.
Like you say, stalking and harassment.
Yeah.
You know, if you ask a teenager, are they worried about getting 1,000 texts a day? They'd think that's quite normal, wouldn't they? Ask me, and I'd be really worried. So
no, I'll do that. Thank you. No, thank you.
You're
Sorry
welcome.
to jump in. I just
no,
was
you're
a bit
fine.
confused over that. Thank you.
Anybody else before we move on? We've just got to move on to the last section.
So there's one which says, do we need to do safeguarding for vulnerable adults as well, as that would include young people over 18 but under 25?
It might be worth it. Yeah, it might be worth it actually, because my specialism is kind of children, really. So it might be that, again, you should find some free training locally within your safeguarding board or partnership. Sue, have you got your hand
I
up?
have,
Hello.
yes. Hello there. It was a question around, I think Julie, I don't know whether Julie would be the best person to answer it.
She might
But
be.
we are not, as a forum, you don't take on individual cases
No.
as such, do you? But when it comes to safeguarding, that's obviously a different matter. But what about sort of linking back to the next question, where we have families that do have difficulties and maybe not getting that support? Does the safeguarding also come under that early help request? Can a forum do the referral through for early help? I just want to clear that up, because I don't want to be, if we had that, I'm not saying we have that situation, but if we did, I think it needs to be really clear to forums that they can.
So anybody can refer, into early help. So again, I think it's about extending your knowledge of your area, knowing where your early help teams are, and linking in. They very often want to know about people like you, you know. So
it's just about knowing that if you were to do a referral to early help, that you're not breaking your policies and constitution as a parent carer forum for that.
You're seeking help for somebody. So, you know, and you can also support a parent or carer to apply themselves for an early help.
Yeah.
People are frightened, aren't they? They immediately think early help. Oh no, it's not really early help. This is social services coming to get my children, don't they?
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's how you sell it, isn't it? It's how you say it.
Yeah.
Is that all right?
Thank you. Thank you for clarifying.
Thank you.
That.
So I need to move on to the last section, otherwise we're going to go over time. I'm sorry you've had to listen to me talking all morning. You'll be able to have a cup of tea when we've finished. So just lastly, it's just about thinking as a forum. And as I've just said at the beginning, I am new to your world of forums, parent carer forums. I have just become a trustee on ours locally. So I'll soon be finding this out myself. But I think it just applies generally to anywhere, any organisation, just to sort of check with yourselves where you are. You know, how do you think that you're doing? So, you know, have you got an up-to-date safeguarding policy for children and adults? Have you rolled it all into one? And as I said earlier, you know, let's not have a policy that looks beautiful but sits on a shelf and it's not shared. A safeguarding policy is not a confidential document. It should never be naming anybody other than perhaps your name safeguarding leads and things like that. Should never be naming any children or adults on there. It's about looking at what you've got in place and what you would do as a forum. And you can have that, you know, if you've got a website, you can have that on your website for people to have a look at. You're doing some awareness this morning, and it is only awareness this morning. And I'm sure you've got lots of things now buzzing through your head thinking, oh, I want to know more about that, or oh, I didn't know about this. Make sure that you get yourself up to date. If you've got other members that you think that might find doing this training helpful, or some of you have already picked up, you feel that you might need some further training, then do it. Always record it when you've been on any training, when you did it. Designated safeguarding leads, I think it's perhaps every couple of years they would need to do their training, making sure that they're keeping up to date with the knowledge and skills. How are you recruiting people, your volunteers, your workers? Are you doing your disclosure and barring service checks? How are you managing everybody? Do you work in a safe way? Do you, for example, have a code of conduct? How do you respond to concerns that are raised, whether it's the safeguarding concerns or how your forum's running? How do you do that? So these are all things for you after this session to reflect on and have a look at within your own forum. Do you know about your local area? Do you know what's on offer in your local area about things that I've mentioned this morning? Do you know where to go to speak to somebody in early help? Do you know where to get more training? You know, have a look at those links locally. Are there things in place that are perhaps leaving you vulnerable? So some things that might leave people vulnerable, and you know, and I've used this, I've amended this and put community, but I've used this in schools. If you've not got a clear, confident action, child protection or adult safeguarding policy, If you're a bit complacent about this, oh, well, we're in a really nice area. We don't have families like that. We don't have any of these kind of issues. I don't think really we need to do any safeguarding training, actually. You always need safeguarding training. Oh, we don't like talking about things like this. We don't want to upset anybody. You know, this could leave you vulnerable. A lack of training for your safeguarding leads. So they're the people that you're gonna be going to. So, you know, they need that support and perhaps some supervision and some extra training. And as I've mentioned already, you know, generally a lack of training. Your policy determines the actions that you're going to take to keep children and vulnerable adults safe. So it's showing your commitment, it's showing that you're all clear about what you're doing, and everybody should see it. You know, what will you do? You're going to follow safe working practices. You'll know what to do if there are concerns about a colleague, about a staff member, about a volunteer or a trustee. And you will identify your designated safeguarding lead and any deputy roles and how you contact them. That's what your policy should say. The tendency with policies is we have hundreds of pages, which after a bit all blur and we don't read them. So, you know, relatively clear and concise, but that's quite difficult to keep it clear and having somebody who's just written one for you. These are your checks. I'm not going to go through all those, you know, but these are your checks that you would have if you're employing anybody. You know, you've got your basic, you've got a standard, you've got enhanced, and you've got an enhanced with children's barred list information for those colleagues that you've got who are working in regulated activity. So they're working directly with children. So they're the different types of DBS checks. And that explains what a regulated activity is. So it's a job role, or even if it's only just a small part of your job, it doesn't matter. If it means that you're working directly with vulnerable adults or children, then it's classed as regulated activity. And again, you know, I'm not an expert on DBS checks, but there's a link there straight through to what you need to do to get people checked. Sometimes we have concerns about members of our committee and staff and volunteers, and it's really worrying when it's somebody that we know. We might not feel it's our place to report somebody, as it seems to be, but it is really important that we do take some action. And it might just be that you've got some general welfare concerns as well. But if we are worried about somebody and we think that they pose a risk to children or to adults, then we need to deal with that promptly. So again, going to your safeguarding lead, having that discussion with them. They will link in with the local authority. It's a LADO, which is a local authority designated officer. It might be that they call something different in your local area. It might just be that they're a designated officer. They're usually based within, there's one in children's social care and there'll be one in adult social care. So again, it's good practice to know who that person is or where you can find that number to speak to somebody. So if we had a concern or an allegation about a member of staff or a volunteer or a trustee, then safeguarding lead, they will then have that conversation with that LADO. That person is a key contact. They deal with allegations and give advice and guidance. So not everything where you have a concern means it's going to go through a massive big you know, investigation and that police are going to get involved, but they are the first person to speak to. They can give advice and guidance, but they may feel that the concerns that they're listening to do warrant further investigation. And then, so they would then start that process off. Obviously, you know, people within your organisation would be invited to meetings. You would be part of that process. Usually your safeguarding lead, or it might be your chair, provided it's not concerns about the chairperson. So it will work alongside procedures to protect children or the adult as well. So if that makes sense. And all allegations are considered on an individual basis and dealt with accordingly. So some may not go anywhere. They might be battered back to your forum to say, actually, this is not, we're not interested in this. This is something that you need to deal with yourself. It's not a child protection or an adult safeguarding issue. It's a practice issue, and they might bat it back, or it might go forward. I hope that made sense. So in terms of yourselves as a forum, and we are nearly finished, it's helpful to have a code of conduct in place so everybody's clear about what's expected of them. It could be that if we do have a scenario here where we do have a potential allegation against somebody, we might be that we ask somebody to just stand down temporarily whilst it's being investigated. I would just need to stress that just because somebody's being investigated doesn't mean that they're automatically guilty. Anything like this can be really distressing for everybody concerned. So, you know, whether it's true or not, we need to be able to manage this properly. And it might be that you feel it's not appropriate for that person to be working, to be taking part in things while this is going through. Information, as I've said earlier, should always be confidential. This is on a need-to-know basis. We don't want to share this information with everybody. It should be just kept to the people who are directly involved in the investigation. But that LADO person within the local authority will guide you through the procedure. They're used to it. You're not used to it. I'm not used to it, but they will guide you through. So I'm going to leave it there because we're nearly out of time, unless there's any more questions, because I just want to just stress that's just been a snapshot of a load of safeguarding information that I've given you this morning. You know, as you can see there, I always see safeguarding, it's like a jigsaw. You're pulling all these little pieces together. You've listened to a lot this morning. You've heard me rambling on this morning. You know, I don't want you, you're not going to be an expert. I don't want you to have nightmares about it. I want you to have another look through this when you get it. Have a look at the links I've provided to you. Speak to your designated safeguarding lead if you're worried. And what I think normally happens, when you've done something like this, it starts you thinking about people that you know. You might suddenly think, do you know what, I think I need to do something about that I've seen or what I've heard or what I'm worried about. Good. If that's made you think, then that's good. You know, and if there's anything else that anybody needs to know, you know, I've given you my email address there. I'm not an expert, you know, but if there's anything that anybody wants to ask me directly, I don't mind you emailing me there. They're the links that I've given you, as well as the ones that I've given you all the way through. So have a look at that working together. That's good. Keeping children safe in education is actually for schools, but it's got some really good information in it, and it's got some brilliant links. You can't go wrong with the NSPCC. And, you know, unless you're buying something in specific, all their information's free. You can get posters, leaflets, disclosure and barring service there. There's support for voluntary organisations and adult social care as well. Thank you.
Hi, Sharon. I've just got a couple of things.
Yeah.
One question was, do forums need to have a safeguarding officer?
Yes.
Is it advisable?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. And lovely. Thank you.
And it needs to be that somebody agrees to do it. You can't force somebody to be a safeguarding officer.
That's
so.
Yes.
When you have your meeting tonight, somebody think, right, you're going to be it. Yeah. You really need a safeguarding person. Yeah.
Lovely, thank you. And people were asking where they can access DBS because they might be struggling to kind of get DBS checks. So I kind of thought the CVS might be a good place, and also the DBS website might list organisations.
Yeah, it tells you all about it on there. Yeah.
Okay, lovely. I'm just checking, and there's a lot of thank yous.
Oh, good.
And Helen's told people where to go to do the survey.
Good.
Can I just add, there was a question about if somebody has a DBS check already for a different organisation they've worked for or volunteered for, can the forum
Does it
use?
transfer?
Yeah.
I'm not sure, to be honest, Sarah, because an ideal answer would be yes, of course it would. But knowing DBS like I do, I would always just double check that, because they say that for schools, that if you've worked in the 3 months prior to getting a new job in a different school or college, you don't need to get a new DBS. And then we find that they do. So I would double check that. If you do the DBS online, you can do the like an update service. So it's like a continual process, but obviously the person applying has to pay for that. So I think you get your DBS free, don't you, when it's a voluntary or community organisation. But if you want to do the update service, so that would mean a new, you know, if you came somewhere, move on somewhere else, that they could check it to see whether you've got one. But I think it's something like £14 or £15 that you would have to pay as an individual to do the DBS update service. So I would check.
Okay. Were there any other questions from you, Julie, that you picked up?
Okay. Is there anything else? And there's another link there for your forum. So you contact your regional parent participation advisor. There's webinars.
And we will be sending out a template policy that Sharon has helped us put together. Thank you, Sharon. So we will be sending that out to forums in the next few weeks. So I think if there's no more questions, it's just a huge, oh, there is another question from Aminta.
Hi, my question is, I think a couple of people have asked this, and just a yes or no would be great. Is a safeguarding officer and a deputy safeguarding officer required, or is it just good practice? Is it obligatory?
Well, I would say, I mean, I would say that you should have one. Sarah,
I think having a safeguarding lead is essential.
Yeah.
And whether you have a deputy or not,
that's up to you.
It's not the law, but I think you definitely need someone that everybody in the organisation can go to.
Yeah.
And who can lead on safeguarding.
Yeah.
Otherwise,
and again, they don't have to be an expert. It's just about having that somebody that you can link in with, who then will know who to contact to get advice. So I would say it would, like Sarah, it's definitely good practice, but it isn't a legal requirement. But I would say, why wouldn't you?
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think we're done, Sarah, are we?
In that case, it just needs me to give a huge thanks on behalf of everybody to Sharon for guiding us through the webinar on safeguarding. And we will send out the recording and the policy out to everybody in a week or so. So just give us a bit of time and we'll send it out to you.
Okay. And thanks everybody for attending this morning. And I do hope I've not given you nightmares. Go and have a cup of tea and relax and forget about safeguarding for a bit. Thank you, everybody.